Welcome to the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. Larry is the author of over 40 books, the founder of Dove International, a worldwide family of churches and ministries in 6 continents, and has over 50 years of leadership experience. He and his guests will share inspirational leadership insights from their journey with God. These insights, gleaned from serving leaders in many nations, will transform your life and leadership. For more information on Larry's books and resources, visit LarryKreider.com.
Larry Kreider here with the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. We're into Season 2. With me in the studio today are Luke and Julie Weaver from Lancaster, YWAM. Welcome, guys.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
I'm looking forward to asking you some good questions. We're going to have a lot of fun. We've been so blessed with Season 1. Season 1 just a few weeks ago, and more than 12,000 people listening from 110 plus countries. Just amazing. And what we try to do in this podcast is find those little things, little changes we can make a massive difference if we make those changes in obedience to God. And so we're so glad you guys are here. You've got so much inside you that so many around the world need to understand and learn. So Luke and Julie, talk to us about Lancaster YWAM. What is Lancaster YWAM?
Yeah, so there's many different places where they have YWAM expressions. Yeah. So this is, you say, well, this is YWAM and it's in Lancaster. So it's YWAM Lancaster.
Yeah.
And we're just pioneering YWAM Lancaster. We're only a little over 2 years officially into the journey of YWAM Lancaster. Had our dedication in June of 2020, and Julie and I serve as pioneering leaders there at YWAM Lancaster.
Great. And Julie, your role?
Yeah, so I'm on the leadership team, was kind of part of the initial pioneering team, and have had a number of different roles. Really care a lot about the staff, pastoral care, that type of thing. Yeah. Right now on an unofficial basis, but yeah, just really enjoy being part of it. So.
Well, we're going to talk about leadership here in just a moment. We are so excited about what you're doing, that YWAM Lancaster is here, right here in our county. I think I told you sometime back that, 40-some years ago, we tried to start a YWAM right here. There's going to be at a place today called Refreshing Mountain. We're thinking about buying that place. It was way back in the day. And when I called somebody in the YWAM world and said, well, how do we do this? They said, we have to do a DTS. And I was a young pastor, and I couldn't do a DTS. So man, here you guys are 40 years later. It's happening. That's such a blessing. Well, let's talk about things you've learned about leadership. First of all, long before YWAM, you've been involved in leadership in various areas. Talk about growing. Did you both grow up in this county here?
I grew up in Colorado.
Colorado, which part?
So Montrose, which is on the southwestern part of the state.
Yeah.
So my whole family lives there still.
Wow.
And we go to visit usually every year. But
so you're a transplant to Lancaster County.
I am.
He drug you here. Wow.
Yeah. So.
And Luke, you grew up here?
Yeah, I grew up in this county.
Okay. Now, for both of you, when you grew up, when you were young, you're teenagers, early 20s, whatever, did you have a sense of, I'm called to some kind of leadership?
Yeah, I actually wanted to be a missionary and a pastor's wife. So I always just had a desire to impact people's lives, and especially in missions, ministry, that type of thing.
And today you're a mom, you got 6 amazing kids, right?
Yes.
From how old? 16 down?
Yes, 16 down to 4.
Wow. So a lot of your leadership right now is being a mom.
Yes, that's right.
Again, we'll talk about how that works. What about you, Luke? Do you have a heart for leadership when you were young?
Yeah, I was thinking about that question, and I didn't have a lot of leadership positions growing up because the places that I was at didn't really have them. The school I went to didn't have a student council president, or the church didn't have anything like that. And so I think the biggest lessons that I had were some things that I felt like my mom really instilled in me growing up, and that was whatever you do in word and deed, do it wholeheartedly.
That's good.
As unto the Lord, and this concept that that we are stewarding everything about our life, with the Lord. And so, how are we stewarding that? What are we giving? Are we giving 100%? And so growing up, that was always an encouragement that I always remembered. It's like my mom would always say, well, whatever you're doing, if you're in school, you're doing your studies, if you're playing on the sports field, if you're out with friends, make sure you're doing it 100% for the honor and glory of God. So I think that was probably maybe one of my first leadership lessons was, give 100%. I think that my lifestyle had been shaped by that, and their influence comes from that maybe more than a position.
Sure, makes sense. Now, how did the two of you meet? How'd you meet?
Yeah, he and his brother came out to do a DTS with YWAM in Cimarron, Colorado, which is about an hour from where I grew up.
Really?
Yeah, so I knew people at the base. I was actually 16 at the time. He was 19. And so we got to know each other a little bit through that. And then he came back on staff for 2 years. And that's where we got to know each other more.
Here's an interesting note.
I want to hear it.
So we went to church that Sunday, our first Sunday in Cimarron, Colorado.
Right.
We went down to church, down to town. And the whole reason that we got introduced to Julie was that they said, oh, you guys are, Luke and Joseph and Luke Weaver. Well, you would be interested to meet Weavers. So Julie's last name was Weaver as well. So
really?
She
Yeah.
didn't have to change her last name.
Yeah, not as common there, but it's more common here. Yeah.
Wow. Did your family come from this area? Way back in the day or something?
There is actually some relatives way back. Yeah,
Okay.
my great-grandfather was
Really?
in York.
He's buried in York,
Yeah.
cemetery in York County.
So yeah,
So, Julie, you went through YWAM then?
I did.
And
Yeah.
how old were you when you went through YWAM?
I was 18. On my 18th birthday, actually, I went to do my DTS. So it was
Wow.
part of my senior year of high school because I was homeschooled. So yeah, so I went to Lakeside, Montana for my DTS.
Sure. Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah.
And then you guys get married. You're both in YWAM when you get married?
No, we got married, and then we both worked jobs for the
Okay.
first year of our
In
marriage.
Colorado?
In Colorado, yeah. So
Yeah.
so I did my DTS in '97. She did hers in '99, and then we got married and lived in Colorado for the next till 2009, actually. And so we worked jobs our first year of marriage, and then we actually had a really unique kind of directive from the Lord that God spoke to us both separately to go on a trip to Pakistan. So that kind of re-engaged us with missions after 1 year of working kind of in the marketplace together, enjoying our first year of marriage.
Sure.
So we went on a 6-week trip with some of our friends who were stationed in northern Pakistan.
Okay.
And that kind of got us going back into kind of a more missional ministry direction.
Now, you look back in your life, did you find that was good for you to work for a year in a quote-unquote real job, as some people would call that?
Yeah.
Or was that good, or you think, no, not necessarily, it's for some people? Give me a response to that.
Yeah, I personally would encourage people to be in a spot for their first year or so of marriage where they're able to have support from community. They're able to give kind of a little bit more of a focus on setting foundations in their marriage. I mean, we had a great time. I mean, whoever came home first started the dinner, and then we would eat, and then we'd go out in the yard and we'd play wiffle ball, go on walks,
Cool.
we just pretty much got to spend just so much time together. And as life goes, your capacity grows, your responsibilities grow, and you don't quite have that same type of focused time that you have that first year. So we loved it.
Good. Now, I'm going to talk to you just a bit later about how you got involved in YWAM Lancaster, how that happened, the whole process. Because I remember talking to you, Luke, years ago when you were at the Gateway House of Prayer and leading that whole deal. And you said, there's got to be a YWAM here in Lancaster County. It's got to be. Here's something. So I want to hear that soon. Sure. But let's start with the two. How did you get back here then? How did that all happen?
So Luke had a word from the Lord about building a house of prayer when we were in Colorado. So he had done an extended fast and felt like the Lord just kind of out of the blue said to build the house of prayer. And we were familiar with IHOP Kansas City, the International House of Prayer there, but we weren't really super familiar with it. And so we were processing that and trying to decide, okay, Lord, what do you have for us with this?
Right.
And as part of that, we had actually heard about Gateway House of Prayer because Luke's from this area. We would come back and visit sometimes.
Sure.
Jimmy Nyman, we didn't really know him, but we'd heard about him. And there's an internship at Gateway that was starting. And so we were on a camping trip and just spending time with the Lord, just really seeking him about, okay, Lord, what do we do with this word? And during that, I felt like the Lord gave me an Isaiah where it says actually go through the gates.
Isaiah 62.
Sure.
Isaiah 62, and there's other parts in there that felt like the Lord was speaking that really directed us to now is the time to actually come here for the internship. And so he did. That was in 2009, in fall of 2009. We just had a baby.
Wow.
Moved a month later and came here thought we would only be here for 8 months for the internship and that we would go back to Colorado. And start a house of prayer there. That's what we thought.
Wow.
So, but God had a much different plan. So.
Yeah.
Could I highlight that?
Please.
I wanted to highlight one of the most significant leadership lessons that we learned, I would say early on, maybe when both of us went to YWAM this is really a strong foundation in YWAM, is this idea of being directed by the word of the Lord.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, so...
I mean, there's like Lauren Cunningham's life message in so many ways.
Yeah. One of the first things you read is that really you, God?
Right.
And Lauren started YWAM out of a clear vision from the heart of the Lord, and that's something that gets instilled is, first of all, that all believers are called to hear the voice of the Lord.
Yes.
And that's a foundation for a relationship. Second of all, that our direction in life is ordered by the Lord, that we position our hearts to be aligned with God, receive things from God, and then we walk in obedience for what we received. And so part of that foundation was given to us. And I would even say not just for ministry, but for marriage, and really for any relationship that you need to walk closely with people. This idea that the foundation is the word of the Lord was something that was instilled in us. And in our marriage, it's like, well, you never have to argue about who's right, or you never have to feel bad about somebody was right and somebody was wrong, because the way that you make decisions is you say, God, what would you want us to do? And then each individual commits to listening to the Lord, receiving something from the Lord, and then that's the foundation that you make your decision from. So it's never a blame, well, you wanted to do this and I just went along with it, or things like that. You can always come back to saying, no, I took time, I heard from the Lord, I agreed that this is something that God told us. So the foundation then comes back to, we have the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord never returns void.
Right.
It always accomplishes the purpose it's intended for.
Yeah.
And so that was just a huge foundation for us, both for our marriage. I mean, we got a whole story of that. This isn't, particularly a marriage podcast. So we won't go into that. But, our marriage based on the direction of the Lord, the word of the Lord, it's such a firm foundation because you have such stability to say, no, this was authored from the Lord's heart. And same thing with our word to come to Gateway. It was a clear word of the Lord moment. And we can talk about some more of those, but we have signposts, markers in our life where every season God was so faithful to give us directives. And our faith, faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of the Lord. Right. And faith is that spiritual energy that you need to accomplish things. Yes. It's that confidence that you have that God's with you. And for us, that starting place of faith is we waited on the Lord, we received something from God, we agreed together in unity on it, and then that's a foundation that can't be shaken. That's
fantastic. Now, let's dig a little deeper into that. So you're both seeking God. You both want the word of the Lord. You need the word of the Lord together. What happens when you're hearing two different things? Has that ever happened to you? Mm-hmm. Okay, so what happens then? What do you tell someone who's saying, my husband, my wife, and I, we're trying to find the way of the Lord. We're seeing two different things. What do they do?
Yeah, well, I think for marriage and for ministry, depends on the scope of the decision, of course. Yeah. There are times when a decision is less important or has a little less impact. And we have a time crunch where we need to make a decision where we come up, we have two different thoughts on it, and we'll say, well, we need to make a decision. It's the scope. What should we do? And one of us usually will feel maybe a little stronger directive from the Lord than the other. Other person's like, wasn't super clear, but I thought maybe this. And so then we usually try to lean into who had the kind of the strongest directive from the Lord in that. On decisions that are larger, both in our marriage and in our leadership and ministry, we are committed to agreeing together around that before we move forward.
Any major decision you need to be in agreement. I agree. Julie, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the same thing as far as like just waiting then we wait and don't make that decision and move forward until we're both on the same page with it. And then we can both have the buy-in or go back to the Lord of like specifics or whatever it is and then have the buy-in together.
Okay. Yeah. So you go through the internship, Gateway House of Prayer. You come through the other end of that. What happens next?
Yeah, it was wild. We were here for about 2 months in the internship. And Jimmy Nyman, the director of the House of Prayer, he comes up to me and he says, hey, I'd like you to consider staying here as the assistant director.
I can hear him say that.
And I said, wow, I'm sure there's a story to that. You don't usually show up for 2 months as part of their basic training program, and then somebody offers you a job as assistant director. And he said, well, actually, we've been praying for a number of years for somebody, and we feel like you guys are it. So he asked us to, commit to 3 years if we were going to take that role. So again, same thing. We go back to the Lord. We ask, God, this is a little different than we had in our hearts. We packed all our stuff up and we came here from Colorado in a little trailer, and now it looks like we might be here 3 years. What are you saying? And so again, together we went to the Lord, got into a place of unity and feeling like God was saying, yep, this is part of what I have for you, and this is something that God's done with us a lot. I think something that might be encouragement to believers is that we often have an idea of the end of the directive that God gives you. Like God sending us to do an internship in Pennsylvania so we can start House of Prayer in Colorado. But we didn't have, that wasn't spelled out clearly by the word of the Lord.
Right.
But it was that's what we thought.
Sure.
That's what we understood. So we came here thinking, well, that's what we're going to do. But then in the journey, for us, often God has shifted the clarity of what we're to do in the journey. Exactly. So as we've been moving, it's been okay, we're going to Pennsylvania and then we're going to go back to Colorado. Oh, whoops. No, we're not. We're actually going to stay here at the House of Prayer a little longer. And then God's led us on a journey clearly by his word through some twists and turns. It hasn't been a linear line.
Right.
Hey, at 20, I got this word and I've been working on it ever since. And here's what we're doing. So same thing. We felt that we were to stay for the 3 years and commit to assistant director. And then in that process, I feel like either God was kind of sneaky or Jimmy was kind of sneaky. I'm not
maybe
sure.
both.
Maybe both. In that process, Jimmy felt to transition out to plant Lifeway Church up in Lebanon, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to ask you guys to consider being directors." And so the same process again, back to the place of prayer, in agreement, felt to do that.
Now, while you were in that role, of course, your heart's been missions and training for missions, and that's been your heart for years. And you started to sense, well, maybe there's something else down the road here. Talk to us about the journey from there to when YWAM Lancaster actually started and you guys are directing and giving leadership and all that. Talk about that journey and how it got to lead you.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity because people might ask, well, why did you go from YWAM to the House of Prayer and back to YWAM? What was God up to in that journey? And I think for me, the clarity that I have on hindsight is that there were foundational pieces both in my personal life and in what was needing to be expressed in our culture that we wouldn't have gotten without going through the journey of the House of Prayer. Okay. So it was instilling this place of intimacy. It was walking in authority in the place of intercession. And so Gateway House of Prayer, we spent 8 years in 24/7 praying for the purposes of God on this little piece of real estate we call Lancaster County to be fully expressed. Mm-hmm. And there were so many downloads, impartations from the heart of the Lord that we got in the place of intercession, in the place of prayer, that we would have never had that intel. We would have never had that understanding. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to base our faith even on these prophetic downloads if we hadn't been in the place of waiting in prayer and intercession. Okay. So in the place of prayer, God just ignited our hearts for his dream for this county, that he had something unique, something special for this place that wasn't ever just for this place, but was to be multiplied to the nations. And, the revelation of the Abrahamic covenant that God says, listen, Abraham, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you a great nation. But it's not just so you can enjoy the blessings of God. It's always about expressing that to the nations of the earth, the families of the earth. So every family of the earth could be blessed through you. And so it was in that place of 24/7 prayer, contending for the heart of the Lord, contending for the dreams of God to be manifest from this little piece of real estate to the nations, that God just knit our hearts with his. And just feel like my heart got married to like I'm living and dying based upon seeing the fulfillment of the dream of God over this piece of real estate, knowing that for whatever reason, God has chosen a little farming community in Pennsylvania to have a global impact. Yeah. And I even believe that God's given us words that this place is even to be a part of seeing the fulfillment of the Great Commission, a key part, the tip of the sword to fulfill the Great Commission in this generation. And so it was really that context out of this place of being joined with the heart of the Lord in prayer, that you get an impartation from God, a DNA download from the heart of God, that begins to be a foundation for you then to walk out that assignment. And that's really what happened in 8 years of 24/7 contending for the dream of God for Lancaster to the nations to be fulfilled.
You were here for 8 years? That long?
At the House of Prayer, yeah.
Wow. And Julie, your experience was the same, basically?
Yeah, similar, where I feel like we did have a foundation in prayer previous. So we had tracked some with Lou Engel's ministry.
Sure.
We've gone to several calls, fasting, prayer. All of that was part of our story. But the day in, day out gateway piece with the 24/7, 100% what Luke was saying, like just giving us a heart for regional revival, wanting to see God move, but then out of that touch the nation. So yes. And I was mostly mom in that season.
Of course.
Had started out with 3 kids when we first moved here, ended with 6.
Right.
And just such a good season. So we would bring the kids to the House of Prayer because we really wanted them also to really experience that culture and that to be their norm, just being in prayer and worship and all that kind of stuff as well. So it was a big part of our journey of just that foundation. Yeah.
So then what happened next? Like, how did, obviously our mutual friend Norman Kurtz gave land to Youth of the Mission. Norm was on our board years ago in our first outreach ministry called Lost But Found. I'd known Norm forever, and of course, as you know, Luke, we rented, Dove International rented that property for years, all-night prayer meetings and going to the nations and all that there. Bill Landis gave his life to Christ in the basement in those days. That whole property, Twin Pine, all these connections is so cool. And then there's, a group of regional fathers in this area who've been praying for revival for years. And then you and your generation praying to God for revival. And so what happened next? It didn't just happen overnight, obviously, but you guys walked a walk of obedience for this to happen. And you had to make some sacrifices for this to happen, obviously. Talk to us about what happened next.
Yeah. Can I just go back really quick to what Julie was saying
Of course.
about Gateway is
Of course.
that one thing that might be an encouragement to those who are listening is that Julie and I's role has not always been the same in leadership. We haven't had the same position.
Yes.
Some people do. They're directors
Sure,
together. Or Julie and I have very often had a different position, but the same heart.
Okay.
And so I want to take a moment just to brag on Julie, because she hasn't had necessarily the upfront position.
Right.
But when God spoke to us, there was always a 100% buy-in that we're doing this together.
Yes.
That we're in unity on this. And then even with the kids, we have a large family. We have 6 kids.
Right.
So rather than the kids kind of being something we got to navigate while we're in ministry, the kids are full participants in the ministry.
Good.
So when we're doing things, we have services or meetings, it's opportunity for our whole family to come. And not only are we modeling how to do life and ministry as a family, but also the kids are getting infused with DNA from the culture and the environment that we're a part of.
Yes.
And so I just want to say for those of you out there, you don't have to have equal positions.
That's so good.
You don't have to have the same positions.
Right.
But it is important to have one heart.
Yes.
That you are in unity and in agreement about what you're doing, and that there's a buy-in, not just from your spouse, but also with your family. That's really an important part of this, so that you don't, you don't have to kind of choose, well, do I do the family or do I do the ministry? But that there's a ownership from the entire family that buys in to the ministry. So that was a really important thing, I think, for us as we've been leading and our family's been growing, learning how to navigate that in a way that, we really can't. We're very different people with very different gifts.
Right.
So we need to exercise the gifts we have and operate in those roles, but be in unity and of the same heart. Yeah. But anyway, that was important. So
it's very important. Thank you for emphasizing that. And by the way, anybody listening today, you want to know more about YWAM Lancaster, you want to know more about Luke and Julie Weaver, all the information on the show notes. You can check that on the show notes, and you can avail yourself to that also. Now, continue the journey.
Sure. Yeah, so there was a lot of prayer. This county has had a lot of interaction with Youth with a Mission, and this county is actually unique in the sense that it's one of the largest financial contributors and even human resource contributors to missions per capita.
That's true.
Of any place in the world. So there's a rich missional history. And Youth with a Mission is one of the largest mission organizations in the world. So it's always been odd that Youth with a Mission has had such a large role to play here, but there's never been a base here. So God began to speak about a new wave of missions out of this county to fulfill the Great Commission. And when they interviewed Lauren Cunningham, the founder of YWAM, and they asked him, hey, you've got 6 million people that have been in YWAM, you've got 35,000 full-time staff, 2,000 locations in the world. Has the vision of the waves of young people happened? He said, no, not even close. The vision that I had was so significant, so powerful, that it's beyond anything that we've experienced, even in light of what God's done. And so when I thought about that, and the founder saying, no, we haven't seen it yet, and the words of the Lord to us about the county and what he wants to do, we just were sure that God wanted to initiate a movement from this county, a fresh movement from this county to the nations. And so there was an opportunity that we heard about with Norman Kurtz donating his property for the use of the establishment of a YWAM base. They just had a meeting and said, hey, who would want to come and hear about this? And I said, man, I need to have a personal meeting. So I met with Michael Berg, director of YWAM Orlando, and Bill Landis, who at that time was the director down in Barbados. Right. And they were the two individuals who have been asked by YWAM to kind of oversee the process. And as they were talking, it was a burning bush moment. Wow. I was sitting listening. I was trembling. I was sweating. I was kind of overcome by this sense of compulsion, like, oh my goodness, we have to be a part of this. And I'm a little bit more spontaneous, and Julie's a good processor. And so I came home and I said, oh my goodness, I had this meeting. I think the Lord might be telling us to be a part of this YWAM Lancaster.
And Julie said,
and she said, I think that's the Lord.
Whoa!
On the spot.
That's awesome.
It was. I think it could be God. He was so excited. He was so revved up about it. I'm like, I actually think this could be the Lord.
Wow.
So. Yeah, but it did. It was unusual in what we thought at that moment. We were the directors of Gateway House of Prayer, 24/7 Prayer Center. We thought, hey, we'll just roll this puppy right into a YWAM base, and we'll just do it. And then they said, no, actually, you got to move your whole family down to Orlando. Yeah. And we're like, oh, didn't see that one coming. So our whole family moved down to Orlando for about 2.5 years. Went through several different trainings, and then God just began to sovereignly connect people to us as we were faithful just to share the vision of what God was putting in our hearts. And it was really a kind of a Habakkuk 2 type of moment, where you receive downloads from the Lord, you begin to just articulate the vision to make it plain, and then the people who read it can run. That's what Habakkuk 2 says.
Habakkuk 2.
It's stand on the wall, let's hear what God wants to say. Right. And then when you hear it, write it down, make it clear, because then people are able to run. And this just began to happen. People began to say, hey, I heard you're the people to talk to, even though nobody had said we're the leaders. We just had signed up first, And so people began to ask us, well, what's happening? And we would just begin to share with them. And so a team began to be built down in Orlando.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize what you said. It's so important for leaders to understand. When you hear from God, when God gives his word regarding whatever, write it down. The whole Habakkuk 2 thing. Because when you write it down, it helps you and I, whoever's writing it down, understand what the vision is. Yeah. And then it's a way that we can share it with somebody else and they can understand what it is. And then obviously you still have to run with it, and there's still faith involved and all that. But I just want to emphasize that. That's so good, so true. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and Peter, I think it's in Peter, he talks about the word of God being an incorruptible seed.
Right.
And so when God shares something with you, it's actually an intimacy moment where God downloads something from his heart, and we are like wombs that we receive this word of the Lord. It's like a womb, God planting his dream, his desire in us. And so there's I think a real fear of the Lord around how do we steward that intimacy? How do we steward what God shared with us from his heart? And are we stewarding that in a way that really allows that to grow and multiply and produce fruit?
Right.
Yeah, that's something that I think about a lot, is that, how are we shepherding, how are we stewarding what God has spoken to us?
So YWAM Lancaster is how old today?
Yeah, so we're just a little bit over 2 years,
2 years
officially.
old.
We've been in the process since 2017. Julie and I have of developing the team and things. So we were 2.5 years in Orlando. We came up to Pennsylvania, and we thought, man, what a great time to launch a missions movement. Vision 2020, March of 2020, man, this thing's going to kick off. And 2 weeks later, the whole world shut down from COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was wild.
Yeah. Man, I get so many more things I'd like to ask you. Our time is almost gone. Let me ask you this yet, and maybe we can get you back and do this again, okay? Because there's so much more. I'm sure you got a lot more inside we haven't even touched on yet. You got a young leader listening right now and saying, man, God's called me to leadership. God's called me to see the world change. I got this vision burning in my heart from God. Any steps you encourage them to take? What steps or what direction would you encourage them to take?
Yeah, I think if I were to share one thing, I would share the story of David. David got anointed to be king and had a clear call on his life, but he continued to be faithful to shepherd some sheep in the back pasture.
He did.
And God is well able to recognize a person who is a faithful steward that he's placed gifts in and bring them from the pasture to the palace. And I think sometimes the mistake that we make is that we try to make things happen. We try to force things. We try to push things. And I think a confidence in God being the author of the process, and then being really faithful to steward what's right in front of you. What is right in front of you?
You've used two words today that are powerful: the journey and the process. Because God is the God of the journey and God is the God of the process. And a lot of people don't understand that. They think it happens today, it's going to happen today. No, he's in process, working Christ in us. We all know that. The older we get, the more we understand how much we need Jesus. You explained that really well. Anything you want to add yet to the podcast today, Julie?
I think when God asks, one of the things we learned too is when God asks you to do something and you're birthing something new, it's so much bigger than me. It's so much bigger than us.
Right.
And that's where it's like we cannot do it on our own. And that realization, even that we can't shoulder the weight of leadership on our own, it's like it can be a big responsibility. But recognizing like it's actually, if it's God's dream, it's his baby.
That's right.
And so we will do what he asks, and we will work hard and do everything that he's asked us to do. But then at the end of the day, we need to also release that pressure and responsibility that can feel like a lot when you're leading.
Right.
And even when problems come or challenges, like asking the Lord, well, what do you want to do with this? What solution do you have, God? Because I don't know. And so just allowing him to bring the solutions for his ministry, it's a difference. It's a mindset and something that we've kind of walked through times where we have actually felt like we've had to make things happen. We've had to do it because no one else is there or whatever it is.
Right.
Instead of like allowing the Lord to like take the weight of responsibility and recognizing like, this is your dream, God.
Beautiful.
How do you want to do this?
Beautiful. Luke and Julie Weaver, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. So good. I want to have you back.
Thanks for having us.
You guys have so many questions I still want to ask you about what you've learned in leadership, even in YWAM today, in Lancaster today, what that looks like. We didn't even touch on the big Jesus rally. You guys worked tirelessly behind the scenes for that to happen. That's another leadership principle, often taking that lower road, and other people seem to be the upfront people, but we're doing what God called us to do. And without us obeying God, it's not happening. So thank you for joining me today, and again, we'll have you back.
Thanks for having us.
God. Oh yeah, did you have fun today?
It was
good. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast, where we learn these small things, small changes we can make a massive difference in our lives and the lives of those whom we serve. And we'll look forward to seeing you back here next week. Check the show notes, learn more about Luke and Julie Weaver, more about YWAM Lancaster and all that God's done through them, Gateway House of Prayer, and all those amazing ministries we have right here in this area in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So God bless you, and we'll look forward to talking to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. If you want more information about any of Larry's books, daily devotionals, small group resources, or any other teachings, go to larrykreider.com.